recorded live.
Good evening. Today is August the 22nd, 2015. Welcome to tonight's edition of Researcher 135's Community Call, Daily Talk with Rich Bernadotte. I want you to imagine for a moment you are leaving on a long journey. You have left the city that you've been living in for a long time. You're on your way to a location where you grew up. You have childhood memories of this location. You have with you your family, your young teenage son and your little girl who's 7 years old. You're going on a long trip that's going to be from Texas all the way to Alaska. You're going to spend about a week traveling, stopping at different cities, staying at motels, sightseeing. You're taking your time. It's a slow, relaxed, meandering journey. Finally, after about a week, on August 14th, 1997, you arrive in far northern British Columbia. This is a very, very remote area. The nearest town is 120 miles away. It's called Fort Nelson. That's also where the nearest hospital and the nearest airport is. You've been driving along the Alcan, the Alaskan-Canadian Highway, on your way to Anchorage. And you're now right at near the Yukon border. And you come to a park, a tourist attraction, Liardhotsprings, well known for the hot springs, well known for the swimming there that you can do, the relaxing in the hot springs, the hanging gardens, which is an area where a lot of plants grow because of the tropical temperature created there near the pools, near the hot springs. A lot of plants that are not found anywhere else, and very rare plants. So a lot of people come there for a lot of reasons. And so we join a young lady who's left Paris, Texas, on her way to Anchorage. Her name is Patty McConnell. She has her young son Kelly with her, and her daughter Kristen. And they've stopped here at the Liardhotsprings. They get out and travel, do a little swimming, do a little walking around, and at a certain point, Patty and Kelly have gone into the hanging gardens. Now, this is located between the two pools. There's two pools at Liardhotsprings. There's the Alpha Pool and the Beta Pool, and the hanging gardens is in between. There's probably a mile or two distance between the two pools. So there's a boardwalk that you walk between the pools. And this boardwalk has an access to the hanging gardens, which is, you veer off a little bit from the main boardwalk there to view the hanging gardens. Now, at this point in time, unbeknownst to them, there's a black bear. Persons have seen it earlier in the day, swimming down the Liard River toward this park. It's emaciated. It's underweight. Apparently, it's starving. At a certain point, the bear sees Patty McConnell. Apparently, it sees her first. Kelly's not far from her, just a few feet away. It charges and attacks Patty, dealing serious physical wounds. And at this point, I want to open the phone lines up. Hello, I see we have Northeast Texas on the line, and I see we have Illinois on the line. Northeast Texas, hello. Good evening, Northeast Texas. Okay, while we wait for that caller, I'm going to go to Illinois. Hello, Illinois.
Hi, Rich. Yes, it's a terrible, terrible story. You and I have discussed it before, but I don't think you had ever mentioned to me before that the bear had been sighted before the attack, that people had seen it in the area. And I just wondered, why were the people there, the tourists, why were they not warned?
Well, even more frightening than that is the rangers were not present at Liardhotsprings that day either. And a month or two after this tragedy occurred, which we'll get into the details of in just a moment, it turns out that the bear had been identified as a bear that had been going to a dump to eat until about a month earlier when that dump had been closed down. So the food source for this bear had been cut off, which is why it was starving. It does also turn out when they autopsied the bear that it had broken teeth. So it was having difficulty eating at any rate. And, of course, if you're familiar at all with black bears and with that area of Canada, by mid-August, there's not much warm weather left. The Canadian winters are harsh and brutal and cold, and in a very, very short time, the bears that live in that area will be going into hibernation. So the bear has a very short time to try to seek nourishment before it goes into hibernation. And it was starving and had broken teeth, and those were contributing factors to the tragedy. Northeast Texas, do you have a question or a comment? Cherry, do you have a question or a comment?
Well, I was just kind of wondering, it's just, I've watched a lot of programs, on wildlife up in Canada and places like that, and most of the people up there, they know about, the wild animals and the bears and things like that. And any shows that I've ever seen up north, most people carry guns. And it just seems odd to me that, when you and I have been discussing that even the ones that came to help her, tragically, I think at least one of them died, that no one had a gun in that area. But
well,
it was several minutes later, I think, that someone was able to get their hands on a gun.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. As you know, Canadian gun laws prohibit the possession of firearms in a national park like that. And in a very interesting blog, a man named Jason Hayes wrote a piece called "Sometimes You Have to Fight Back." This was in 2007. And in reference to the tourist you're talking about, whose name was Dwayne Egebrotten, and he, by the way, was from Oklahoma. He just happened to be at the park that day, along with a lot of other people. There were a number of people there that day. We'll get into some of those people in a few minutes as well. This tourist had to run back along the wooden pathways to his car, at least 3/4 of a mile, open his trunk, grab the firearm, and then run back to the scene of the attack before he could shoot the bear. This was in fact illegal. Unfortunately, there was the possibility that even though he saved many lives that day, that he would be charged for discharge of a firearm in a provincial park. Had there been a park range?
I did not realize that it was against the law to carry guns in a park area. I didn't realize that.
Canada's quite different from the United States in a lot of different regards, particularly in their gun laws. Had a park ranger been in the area, they would have had to do the same thing as this man did. Jason Hayes goes on in his blog to say that he worked as a British Columbian park ranger for 2 seasons and spent many days and evenings in the backcountry. During our initial training, he says, we were given a 1 to 2 hour training session on firearms, allowed to fire a shotgun once or twice, and then never saw the firearm again. We were given bear mace and nothing else to deal with bears in the backcountry.
No, it was just a terrible, terrible situation that really should never have happened. But I'm sure there's probably more attacks that happen like that we aren't even aware of. And I just call the area up there up north. Yeah, the far northern area of British Columbia. Far northern Canada, period, it's very sparsely populated. A lot of wilderness, a lot of distance between towns, between civilization. So was she familiar with the area at all? But did she say that she had grown up in parts of Canada? No, Anchorage, Alaska, north of Canada. She had never lived in Canada, to my knowledge.
But, of course, you have to go through Canada on your way to Alaska. She was familiar with the Anchorage, Alaska area, having lived there as a child. To my knowledge, she was not necessarily familiar with this remote part of British Columbia, which is right below the Northern Rockies.
Well, tell us a little bit about the man that tried to save her.
Absolutely. That was a man named Ray Kitchen. He was from Fort Nelson, which is 120 miles away, and he was a truck driver and was working in the area at the time, and had his two daughters with him. He's stopping there to let them swim. He was 56 years old when he saw the scene after both Patty and Kelly had been attacked, and it was a very bloody scene. They were on the ground already with the bear still attacking them. He began to beat the bear with a large stick. Well, of course, this distracted the bear off of Kelly, off the 13-year-old boy. And, of course, the bear began to viciously attack him at this point, and he sustained some severe injuries at that point in time. And at this point, Frank Hingham and Tony Dowk arrived. Tony Dowk was from Alberta. He was also a truck driver. Now, Frank Hedingham, a naturalist, and was the manager of a lady who was his colleague who was there with him that day also. Her name is Lynn Hancock. Frank Hedingham and Tony Dowk began to beat the bear also, kick it and pound it in an attempt to save Ray Kitchen. Unfortunately, the bear just became more violently ferocious, and it virtually decapitated Ray Kitchen. It did a terrible wound to his neck, and his windpipe was visible, and there was just no coming back from that. And by that point, Ingrid Bailey, a firefighter and paramedic from Felton, California, arrived on the scene. And she saw the horror. She saw Ray Kitchen killed. She went over and began to try to stop the bleeding on Patty McConnell, who by this point had gone unconscious. And there was an attempt to bring her back to consciousness to resuscitate her. They also realized how badly injured Kelly was, too, so there was an effort made at that point to render first aid to him as well and to stop bleeding and to do what they could, given the environment and the presence of the bear, which was still just a few feet away. Now, at this point, a young man named Ari Jan Vandervelden, who was with the Department of Geology and Geophysics at the University of Calgary, he was there with his friends doing a seismic project, and they'd been there for 2 or 3 days camping out. They heard the shouting and the noise, and they came upon the scene, and when they saw the bear saw them, and they began to run, obviously, from the bear. Well, Ari Vandervelden slipped and fell, and the bear just pounced right on him. Now, it got him by the leg, and it began to chew on his leg, and he was sustaining severe injuries to his leg. He was mauled and dragged. He managed to get to a tree trunk or log and save his face and abdomen from injury by wrapping his arms and face around there. He protected himself using the tree trunk or log, but the bear continued to attack his leg so badly that his leg injuries required 3 leg operations, and he spent a 3-week hospital stay recuperating from those injuries to his leg. Now, it was at this point that the Oklahoman, Dwayne Eggbrotten, arrived on the scene and ran back and got the firearm and then shot the bear 3 times, killing the bear and putting an end to the carnage.
I know a man against a bear is just no match at all. I know a bear can just rip you to shreds. So many people think that they're just so cute and everything. A lot of people that used to go up into certain parks like Yellowstone and stuff like that years ago when they could, from their cars they could feed the bears and things. And I don't believe that's allowed much anymore. But yeah, it's just a horrendous account.
Well, they're incredibly strong. They're incredibly fast.
Oh,
They are incredibly agile. As a
well, they
matter of
just
fact,
be pure muscle, just pure muscle.
absolutely. One of nature's fiercest creatures. Andrew Whalen on iDigital Times has made the remark, black bears are as ferocious and have killed as many people, if not more, than grizzlies. They're a serious contender. A man named McDonald pointed out black bears are killers, while the black bear is usually considered the less dangerous counterpart to the predatory grizzly, Kodiak, or polar bear. The body count isn't as disparate as most would imagine. In fact, black bears have proven exactly as deadly as the grizzly bear in recent years, with both claiming 22 victims since 2000.
And why do you think that is? Because people seem to approach the black bears more, or they come in contact with them more?
You know, that's a good question. In my research and study and reading on this, it does seem there is some indication and some evidence that the black bear population in northern British Columbia, where this happened, are much more aggressive, violent, and ferocious toward humans than the ones further south. In other words, the ones we have here in the United States, don't underestimate them, of course, but they don't seem to be as ferocious and aggressive as these up in northern British Columbia. So it may be a genetic thing going on there. This may be just a particularly vicious strain of bear up there. They may all share genetic characteristics that make them more violent toward humans.
And maybe they have a harsher environment there where it makes it more difficult for them to eat.
I think that's a very valid speculation. I would say that's probably very accurate. Kelly, the 13-year-old, of course, sustained injuries that were so bad that when they took him to British Columbia Children's Hospital in Vancouver, where he recuperated for 3 weeks, he required 100 centimeters of stitches. He had broken ribs. But one of the positive things that happened while he was recuperating, the actor Leslie Nielsen came and visited him. And I'm sure most everybody knows Leslie Nielsen from those Naked Gun movies. And, of course, he was in Airplane, and he was the captain of the ship in the Poseidon Adventure. Leslie Nielsen's been in a lot of movies, and most anybody is familiar with him. But he came and visited Kelly there at the hospital. So I'm sure that must have been somewhat uplifting, at least to have somebody come there, you know, and visit you like that.
Well, since those attacks, have they done anything at that park to protect people that do stop there?
Well, it was temporarily shut down for a little while right after the bear attack. It was remodeled and redone about a decade later. And I do not know the outcome of this. I would have to do further research, but there was their politics up there are a little bit different than ours. They have something very similar to our Senate and Congress, but I think it's more of a parliament type arrangement. But there was one of the political representatives up there in Canada got up and made a speech before their parliament or what have you, and brought the events of the bear attack out and talked about how important it was to try to change Canadian laws to address that situation. You know, he explained, you know, the guy from Oklahoma had the gun and was able to take care of this, and we've got to do something about this. So hopefully, in the time that's passed since this tragedy, there's been some changes in Canadian law. And again, that's an area I'll have to research, but definitely he brought attention to it at the time, and that is an area that needed to be addressed, obviously.
But you said at the time that there was no park ranger on duty at all?
Not there at that park. Apparently, two rangers were quite some distance down the Alcan. I'm not absolutely certain how far, but apparently miles away from the scene. I don't think they arrived there until well after it was all over. So, no, there was not a park ranger there at the scene.